Welcome to It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach with your host, Sister A. Legree. I wanted to take this time to share a report that recently came out. The report is from the Department of Justice report on the Fulton County Jail. Fulton County is a jail that is located in Georgia. Again, this is the Department of Justice report that came out. It is a report that outlines some of the challenges and problems in the Fulton County Jail. And I wanted to kind of read this as those of you who follow us, igbatt.com. One of the things that we talk about often, the importance of managing serious and persistent mental illnesses. And let me see if I can just make this a little, if I can make it a little bigger, just a little bigger. Um, yeah, if I can make this a little bigger. Okay. Like I said, the importance of managing serious and persistent mental illnesses. When we talk about serious and persistent mental illnesses, we are talking about illnesses that can be managed. We are talking about illnesses that that can be managed just like any other mental health or non-mental health illness. Just like when you have diabetes, it's important for you to manage your what you eat, manage your weight. If you have a cold, you have to manage it. But we're talking about serious and persistent mental illnesses, and we know the importance of managing stress, managing our health overall, managing, taking medications if that's what you need to do. Because as we shared before, when we talk about serious and persistent mental illnesses, we are talking about those illnesses that are so severe that they impact all aspects of an individual's life, right? But what happens is we have far too many people who are with serious and persistent mental illnesses who are in jail. In fact, jail has become, in some states, bigger. You have more people in jail in some states with serious and persistent mental illnesses than we have them in hospitals where they should be. So when we talk about serious and persistent mental illnesses, we are talking about those illnesses that are so severe that they impact all aspects of an individual's life. We're talking about disorders such as schizophrenia or bipolar, untreated. So again, serious and persistent mental illnesses are treatable, just like any other serious and persistent illness. It varies. The treatment will vary. Some people will require medications one time. Some people require medications on an ongoing basis. Some people may be able to do it with therapy, counseling alone. But let me say this, more than likely, when we're talking about serious and persistent mental illnesses, we are going to be talking about some combination of medications, some combination of medications or psychiatry or one or the other. But I wanted to share this report. It's a Department of Justice report that came out on Fulton County, Georgia. And what they did, the Department of Justice, in response to so many complaints that they received about the jail, and I'm sure this is not just indicative to Fulton County, Georgia, but I wanted to share this, right? It starts off. Actually, it doesn't really start off by saying that. There's a lot of Let me see here. Mm-mm-mm-mm. Okay. Okay. I wanna. It actually talks about the jail conditions overall. Okay, but it starts here. It says people with mental health needs experience poor jail conditions and deficient mental health care. The jail environment is harmful to people with mental health needs. A majority of the people who have died in the jail in recent years had a mental illness. We found that 75% of those who died in the jail since January 2021 had a current mental health diagnosis or reported a history of mental illness. So that's 75% of individuals who died in jail since 2021 had a current mental health diagnosis or reported a history of mental illness. The physical conditions of the jail create substantial risk for people with mental health needs. As described above, there is easy access to contraband that may be used for self-harm. For example, in August 2023, a person was able to possess a man-made weapon while on suicide watch. In April 2024, a person was found in his cell using a needle to puncture a vein on his arm, causing severe blood loss. So let me stop right here. So when we talk about an individual, many times who is jailed, that's in jail. The difference between jail and penitentiary, the jail is usually for short term, penitentiary is long term. So many of these people in jail have not even been convicted yet, right? They've just been charged. So kind of keep that in mind. Just because a person is in jail doesn't mean that they've actually done the crime that they have committed, that they're accused of doing, and some of them may not even be guilty. But that's number one. What they're saying here, that 75% of the people who died in jail had a mental health diagnosis or reported a history of mental illness. What happens many times with individuals with serious and persistent mental illnesses, they are admitted into the jail into the jail on small charges, right? Jaywalking, talking too loud. I had a client one time who was out in front of the bank, and he became erratic, and the police presented him with a like a, I forgot what it's called, not a citation, but well, yeah, I guess a citation. Essentially, he had to go to court. He missed his court date, he didn't go, and so that meant now that a warrant was put out for his arrest. So then he was eventually arrested. This is what happens with a lot of people with serious and persistent mental illnesses. They get the charge from the police officer. They forget to come. They don't show up. They don't remember. Then they have a warrant, and then the next time that something happens, they come in contact with the police because they have a warrant. Now they're in jail. So again, what happens is that once a person gets in jail, what this report is saying, of the 75% of those who died in jail who had a current mental health diagnosis or reported a history of mental illness, they were arrested. Okay, so let me back up. So what this is saying, that you had people with a serious and persistent mental illness were admitted into the jail. 75% of those who died in the jail, they didn't say after they left the jail, this is in the jail, had a current mental health diagnosis or reported a history of mental illness. Then it goes on to say, because of the easy access to contraband, you had somebody who was on a suicide watch, right? So suicide watch, meaning that there should have been somebody watching this individual, was able to possess this, but this person was able to possess a man-made weapon while on suicide watch. Then you have another person was found in his cell using a needle to puncture a vein on his arm, causing severe blood loss. So the question is, how did this person with a serious and persistent mental illness was able to get the weapon, and how was he able to get a needle to find a needle? Okay, it goes on to say the jail has padded cells for people who are acutely suicidal or self-harming, but the padded cells are often in disrepair and not suitable for this purpose. So basically, they're saying, yeah, they do have padded cells, but they may probably don't even need them. They're of no use because the padded cells are often in disrepair and not suitable for this purpose. Jail leaders are aware that the padded cells have been unavailable for extended periods, and the cells have remained intermittently unavailable even after repairs. We observe padded cells in varying states of usability during our visits to the jail. On one visit, we observed a padded cell with padding ripped off the floors, exposing concrete. Okay, so again, what is the purpose of the padded cells? The purpose of the padded cells is to keep a person from harming themselves. Sometimes, especially individuals with serious and persistent mental illnesses, they're in the jail. There's a lot of noise. They get overstimulated. Sometimes they hit their head on the wall or attempt to hit their heads on the wall or other body parts as a way just to kind of manage their stress. But it goes on to say that jail leaders are aware that the padded cells have been unavailable for extended periods, and the cells basically are need repair. They go on to say they observed padded cell with a padding ripped off the walls, exposing concrete. The cell had dried excrement, food, and other unknown organic materials stuck to the walls, with litter, discarded clothing, and cockroaches in a drain on the floor. Two other padded cells had broken drainage grates with sharp edges that could be used for self-harm. So the padded cells, you're putting someone in so they can be safe. And what we're saying here is that the padded cells aren't safe because they weren't. They need to be repaired. And then you had grates with sharp edges. We also viewed a padded cell with a metal sprinkler on the ceiling that could be used to tie off a ligature for self-harm. During one visit, we encountered a person on suicide watch in a padded cell that had broken floor pieces. Okay. Mental health staff reported that custody staff used the padded cells for reasons other than their intended use, as mental health staff have discovered people in these cells without having been consulted or notified of suicidal ideation. Such use may contribute to problems with physical state of the padded cells. Conditions on the mental health unit remain poor. This is why it's important that we have to get our fellow brothers and sisters, our fellow mothers and fathers, our fellow children, aunts, uncles, help. There is treatment for mental health services. Jail should not be the first response. Jail should not be an option. Recent county inspections of the mental health unit documented one housing zone where both showers were inoperable and had a foul smelling odor. In another zone, we saw that pooling water. So again, we're looking at just a total mess. The mental health unit had broken lights. Um, in some zones on the mental health unit, people are locked down and held in isolation for 23 hours a day in these conditions. So again, you have someone with a serious and persistent mental illness, someone with a mental illness that is being put in these cells, and it says here, for example, in one of the mental health units, people are locked down and held in isolation for 23 hours a day in these conditions. These conditions are inhumane. So again, it's important that we get our brothers and sisters help for mental health. There is help for serious and persistent mental illnesses. Jail does not have to be or should not be a first response or first option. Then it goes on to say, these problems are exacerbated by a culture among custody officers where mental health issues are deprioritized. So basically, they don't have time. Mental health issues are not at the top of the list. And again, I understand that the mental health, the custody, the officers are probably busy. They're overwhelmed. They got a lot of stuff going on, which is another reason why we shouldn't have people with serious and persistent mental illnesses in custody. That is not the purpose. We should not have our brothers and sisters with serious and persistent mental illnesses in custody, okay? Incarcerated people told us that custody staff disregarded their mental health complaints and requests for treatment. Mental health staff reported repeat instances where custody staff would not respond appropriately to concerns. In January 2024, we spoke with an incarcerated person who was detained in the psychiatric observation unit. He shared that he was considering suicide and showed us a clearly visible fabric noose tied to the vent in his cell. We asked him to take it down, and he handed it over to DOJ representatives. But when DOJ representatives notified nearby jail staff, the staff told them to throw it away in an unsecured trash can and appeared to take no further action. So what they're saying here is even when the DOJ staff said, hey, we have this individual here who's reporting suicide, who's thinking about taking his life, and here's what he was going to use, they told him just throw it away in the trash and didn't do anything else. The cumulative effect of poor physical conditions, security problems, and a culture of disregard is an environment in which mental health needs go unmet and serious mental health conditions are exacerbated. So again, remember when we talked about how serious and persistent mental illnesses, one of the trigger is stress. When you're in a situation like this, right? Um, Going to jail is stressful in itself. But imagine you have an anxiety, you have depression, or schizophrenia or bipolar. It makes it even worse. For example, in the August 2023 incident described above, when officers realized that a person on suicide watch had a man made weapon, they repeatedly tased and sprayed the person with OC to gain compliance. And so, again, this person was on suicide watch. You're assuming that he was on suicide watch for a reason. And this is the same incident that they talked about earlier, right? Um, in the August 2023 incident, right, that they talked about earlier, when officers realized that a person on suicide watch had a man-made weapon, and that's going up further when we way up here, and I'm not going to go all the way back through it, but it's up here that we referenced before in 2023. I'm not going to go too far back up. Okay, but they talk about the incident that we read before, that instead of helping the person get help, they tased him and sprayed him to gain compliance. Despite the person being on suicide watch, and silent and in a daze, there was no documented effort to de escalate or contact mental health staff before using force. So, again, when your loved one went into the Fulton County Jail, if your loved one had a serious and persistent mental illness, if they put him on suicide watch, if he started to have any type of episode, they tased him. They didn't get him any help. They tased him, right? If he was placed in a cell, a padded cell, there's no guarantee that he wouldn't get hurt because a lot of the cells were in disarray. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Despite the person being on suicide watch, okay, I'm going to read that. In June 2023, a person made multiple threats of self-harm and attempts at self-harm after reporting assaults and ongoing threats of both physical and sexual assault. Mental health staff noted his focus on violence and unsanitary conditions of the jail. 3, they found the jail does not provide adequate treatment to people with mental health needs. The jail does not provide adequate treatment to individuals with mental health needs because the jail was never designed for individuals with mental health needs. Okay, keep that in mind. Treatment is what people with mental health, serious and persistent mental health, or mental health in general need. Necessary mental health related interventions, treatment, and rehabilitative services are mostly unavailable at the jail. And this report is talking about the DOJ report, Fulton County, but this is across the board. Even for people with mental health needs residing in specialized housing. Professionals responsible for mental health treatment in the jail are unable to provide services that meet minimum standards. The jail's contract with NAFCARE requires that NAFCARE provide people with mental health disabilities, psychosocial and medication therapies, and individual or group therapy as indicated in order to relieve symptoms, achieve a level of appropriate functioning, and prevent a relapse. For record review and interventions with jail staff, mental health staff, detained people, and advocates confirm that such services are unavailable in the jail. So again, even though the jail has a contract with a provider to provide services, these services are unavailable. Non-clinical mental health staff document educating patients about their mental health conditions but not providing them therapy. Mental health staff describe their services as limited to crisis stabilization and medication management. So again, people are going to jail with persistent mental illnesses, with mental illnesses in general, and they're not getting any type of help. Responses to requests for mental health care are often delayed because officers are unable to escort mental health staff to see patients. We heard numerous reports of requests for mental health care that went unanswered. And again, it is not supposed to be the job of officers to do this. But unfortunately, this is what our society has come to. Our society, we put responsibility for mental health care on the jail system. The jail system was not respond is not, that's not what it was designed to do. Just like with police officers. Police officers do an excellent job with trying to de-escalate situations, trying to de-escalate individuals with serious and persistent mental illnesses in the community. But that is not the role. That is not the job. That is not what they're supposed to be doing. It is supposed to be the job of mental health professionals. It's supposed to be the job of mental health providers to provide that support, not the police. Okay, so again, we complain when the police have to get involved. We complain that the jail is not doing what they should be doing, and they should. But I just want to keep this in mind. This is why we as people, we need to do a better job in advocating. We have to do a better job of helping our brothers and sisters, right? If you have an individual that you know of who is living with a serious and a persistent mental illness, it's important that you get involved. And we talked about that on one of our last episodes, how you do that. Okay? The check-in mental health staff provide to people the check-ins mental health staff provide to people with mental health needs throughout the jail are brief and superficial. So pretty much it's a thing, hey, we just want to see how you're doing. We just want to kind of check in on you, that kind of thing. Um, just need to add some more time there. The check-ins mental health staff provide to people with mental health needs throughout the jail are brief and superficial. Cell side check-ins lasting about 5 minutes and with limited or no confidentiality are common. Some check-ins happen in public view while the mental health provider stands in the hallway at the entrance to a housing zone. So I can only imagine. Let's just say you're in a jail and you can't be weak. You can't give the impression that you're weak or something is going on with you, and someone just come up to you and say, "Oh, how you doing today?" Many times people are not going to be honest, right? Incarcerated people in specialized mental health units lack access to minimally adequate mental health care. People on 3 North, the housing unit for those with mental health needs, generally receive the same low level of mental health care they would receive if they were housed in general population. So what they're saying is it doesn't matter whether it's general population, if you have a mental health diagnosis and you're placed in general population, or you have a mental health diagnosis and you're placed in a specialized mental health unit, it really doesn't matter. Okay? This includes medications and the possibility of a brief check-in with a member of the mental health staff, but even medication and monitoring check-ins are frequently unavailable or disrupted. Mental health staff told us it was not safe to have groups at the jail given the lack of custody staff, and so there is no group therapy provided. Being placed in the jail's other specialized mental health housing, the POU, only means that a person experiencing a mental health crisis, such as a suicidal ideation, is separated from others, may be in a padded cell, and is available for more convenient monitoring. Mental health staff should develop and implement treatment plans for all patients with serious mental health needs. This is what should happen. Mental health staff should do this. These treatment plans should describe treatment methods and set goals for the patient's progress. But we found that even patients on the mental health unit did not have clearly defined treatment plans in their records. Finally, there are not enough psychiatric staff to meet the needs of the incarcerated population. There's only one full-time psychiatrist for the jail who is supported by a part-time psychiatrist and several psychiatric nurse practitioners. Given the significant mental needs of the jail population, this is not sufficient psychiatry staffing. Goes on to say, staffing records reveal that the South Annex does not have any dedicated psychiatric coverage despite the high needs of the population there, which includes 17-year-olds and people in restrictive housing. A psychiatric nurse practitioner reported traveling to the South Annex about once per week to provide services, but this is not reflected in the schedule. So so the nurse saying that she goes once a week, but we don't see it. They didn't see it. Without consistent psychiatric coverage at this facility, it is likely that patients requiring psychiatric care at the South Annex will have significant delays in accessing the care that they need. Third, suicides at the jail reflect deficient mental health care and suicide prevention practice. Fulton County Jail fails to provide minimally adequate suicide prevention care to at-risk people. This failure creates substantial risk for incarcerated people. Problems with lack of confidentiality at intake and availability of security staff, as discussed earlier, make it harder for people to report suicidal feelings during the initial suicide screen and to receive help when needed. When people are identified as at risk for suicide, the jail suicide prevention practices do not provide sufficient protection. People needing observation due to suicide risks may be held in cells with tie-off points that could be used for hanging, objects, or services that could be used for self-harm, insufficient visibility into the cell, or other unsafe conditions that may increase risk of suicide or self-harm. So basically what they're saying is if you have a person who's identified as at risk for suicide and they need support, the current practices, prevention practices, are insufficient. They're insufficient because, number one, they're placed in a cell with tie-off points that could be used for hanging. So in other words, they're placed in cells that have objects and things in the cell that they can use for self-harm. They're placed in cells where the person who is providing the one-on-one can't even see them, and the conditions are unsafe. While inspecting the POU, we saw officers bring in a person who had attempted suicide by jumping off the top tier of his housing unit. Okay. Despite this, he was placed in a POU cell that was not suicide resistant. So again, you saw somebody who attempted suicide by jumping off the top of the what is it again? By jumping off the top tier of his housing unit. But despite that particular suicide attempt, he wasn't placed on suicide watch. Okay. Other people are placed on suicide observation. The jail does not provide constant observation on a continuous basis, uninterrupted basis, as required by the provider's suicide prevention policy. So again, even though the jail said they do, they don't. And part of the reason why they don't, and again, I want to be fair, is because number one, they don't have enough guards, okay, to provide services. I'm sure they're probably busy, which is yet another reason why individuals with serious and persistent mental illnesses do not belong in jail. They belong in treatment, okay? Because, okay, let me go through here. And it says here, although there must be no more than 50 minutes between documented checks for a person on suicide watch, there's often insufficient jail staff to meet this requirement. Okay, so again, jail staff don't have time to do 50-minute checks. Okay, and I'm going to just kind of skip through this. Oh, it says, finally, incarcerated people are often taken off suicide watch quickly. In some cases, the same day they were placed on watch and without appropriate assessment of suicide risk. In one case, a man died by suicide just a few hours after a post-suicide watch assessment found he was not a danger to himself, raising questions about the adequacy of the assessment. So pretty much if the guards, again, they're overworked, they're understaffed, they probably, hey, are you suicidal? Are you fine? He said yes, so they took him off. Adequate safety planning where underlying triggers and reasons leading to suicidal thoughts or attempts are addressed and mitigated. This is not happening. And then goes on to say the jail reported 133 instances of self-harm or suicide attempts, resulting in the need for medical treatment since 2021. This number includes serious suicide attempts, including a September 2022 attempt by hanging when an incarcerated person broke his neck. In that same period, there had been 4 deaths by suicide at the jail. All 4 deaths involved hanging and self strangulation. In multiple deaths, the person likely had been dead a long time before they were even found. We found that the jail failed to provide adequate mental health care and monitoring to incarcerated persons with suicidal ideations and serious mental illnesses. DD, who died by suicide in the jail. And then it goes on to talk about this particular person. It says during the intake screening, DD, which is the person's name, reported severe depression and auditory hallucinations. He expressed an intention and desire to kill himself and was placed on suicide observation. A psychiatrist evaluated him but didn't order psychiatric care or medication. So again, you got a couple issues. You have the guards who are not mental health professionals, and then you have a psychiatrist here who is a mental health professional, didn't adequately provide the services to this individual. Because it says here, he told him he was going to kill himself, right? The psychiatrist evaluated him, but didn't order any psychiatric care or medication. Okay, instead, he was placed in restrictive housing for protective custody. It says over the next several weeks, this patient reported visual and auditory hallucinations on multiple occasions and was smearing feces in his cell, but there were no changes to his care. So again, let me slow down here. It says during the intake screening, DD, which is this patient, this inmate, reported severe depression and auditory hallucination. He expressed an intention and desire to kill himself and was placed on suicide observation. A psychiatrist came. Remember before we were saying they don't have a lot of psychiatrists, only had one, but in this case the psychiatrist did come and evaluate him, but did not order psychiatric care or medication. So again, as a result of that, he was placed in restrictive housing for protective custody. And then it goes on to say that over the next several years, his mental health, his symptoms, he began to decompensate. Over the next several weeks, he reported visual and auditory hallucinations. That means he actually saw things and began to hear things that were not there. On multiple occasions, and was smearing feces in his cell. People saw this, but there were no changes to his care. After about a month in restrictive housing, he threw himself down the stairs in an apparent suicide attempt. Following this incident, mental health staff placed DD on. Following this incident, mental health staff placed DD on and took him off suicide watch the same day. So after all of this, he finally threw himself down the steps. Okay, they put him on suicide watch and then took him off the same day. It goes on to say a psychiatrist evaluated him after the suicide attempt and prescribed an antipsychotic and anxiety medication. Finally, somebody prescribed him some medication. It went on to say he was intermittently medication compliant in the weeks that followed. 1 month after his suicide attempt, he hung himself in his cell. He left a bizarre and disorganized note and drawings in his cell suggesting he had active psychosis when he killed himself. The officer who completed the last security round before finding DD hanging in his cell did not observe him because DD had covered his window with a blanket. The jail also failed to provide adequate, okay, this is another person. So again, what we're seeing here, this is what's happening to our brothers and sisters who are in jail, okay? They are not getting the support that they need while they're in jail. But as I said before, jails were not designed for individuals who are living with persistent mental illnesses. But I want to read this again because I think it says a lot here. Okay. This is from the Department of Justice report, Fulton County Jail. It talks about DD. During the intake screening, DD reported severe depression and auditory hallucinations. He told them that he was going to kill himself. They placed him on suicide observation. The psychiatrist came out but didn't order any psychiatric care or medication. So there was a delay in services, a delay in treatment. He was placed in restrictive housing for protective custody. But as we read earlier, we know how that worked out, right? That those we read earlier how there's no true 15-minute checks, and they're not even they don't have the time really to monitor to watch. But it goes on to say over the next several weeks he reported. So that means if he reported it, he told somebody. So he reported visual and auditory hallucinations on multiple occasions and was smearing feces in his cell. Click. Remember the word reported. It didn't say observed. And that means said it was reported that he told somebody. So somebody saw this. He reported visual and auditory hallucinations on multiple occasions and was smearing feces in his cell. But there were no changes to his care. This is a person who came in who told you that he was having thoughts of killing himself, but there were no changes to his care. After about a month in restrictive housing, he threw himself down the stairs in an apparent suicide attempt. It was after this that mental health staff finally decided to place him on suicide watch. But get this, they placed him on suicide watch, but took him off the same day. A psychiatrist evaluated him after the suicide attempt and prescribed him some antipsychotic and anxiety medications. It went on to say he was intermittently medication compliant in the weeks that followed. Why did no one follow up with him? Why did no one ensure that this individual who has a history, because by now, remember, when he came in, he already told you what he was, what he was thinking about. He already had auditory hallucinations. We could see that he was some psychosis, out of touch with reality, and he had a suicide attempt. He was in the care of the jail. Why did no one mental health to evaluate him to ensure that he was taking his medications? For individuals who are not taking medications or that you have concerns about, you can do what's called an IM, right, which you can provide a shot. But again, they left it up to this person, this psychotic person who recently threw himself down the stairs in an apparent suicide attempt, for him to remember to take his medications. It goes on to say he was intermittently medication compliant in the weeks that followed. That means sometime he was, sometime he wasn't. 1 month after his suicide attempt, he hung himself in his cell. 1 month after his suicide attempt. 1 month. He left a bizarre and disorganized note and drawings in his cell suggesting he had active psychosis when he killed himself. We can argue that he had active psychosis when he was admitted. Because remember, when we talk, what is psychosis? Psychosis is when a person is out of touch with reality. There are many reasons why a person can be out of touch with reality. Sometimes it's drugs, but in this case, we know it's because of his mental health. And we know that because the report says he had auditory and visual hallucinations. Auditory and visual hallucinations are one symptom of when a person is psychotic or out of touch with reality. But for 1 month, because see, he reported these things, so they knew this was going on, but there was no change in his care. Okay, the officer who completed the last security round before finding DD hanging in his cell didn't observe him because he had covered his window with a blanket. So if you have a person who's in protective custody who recently had a suicide attempt, was psychotic, who knew was smearing feces on his cell, if he puts a blanket up in his window, why didn't you go in and at least pull the blanket down to check? Okay. Second one, the jail also failed to provide adequate mental health care to EE, an incarcerated person with psychosis, depression, and PTSD who died by suicide. This right here spells it out for you. She was psychotic, out of touch with reality. With depression, we know what that is. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, who died by suicide. Upon entering the jail, EE reported anxiety, past trauma, and a traumatic brain injury from a motor vehicle accident that he described as a suicide attempt. He told you everything right here, everything that we needed to know. He also reported both auditory and visual hallucinations. A psychiatric nurse practitioner diagnosed him with anxiety and prescribed anti-anxiety medication, but didn't screen him for PTS or psychotic disorders. Another thing, Mental health professionals, we need competent mental health professionals, right? This is incompetency. You're looking at someone here who came in with psychosis, depression, PTSD, who told you he had a traumatic brain injury, past trauma, as well as anxiety, and all you did was focus on the anxiety medication. That's it. During subsequent mental health encounters, EE reported visual and auditory hallucinations and asked for medications he received in a prior incarceration. So he's here before. He wanted the medications, but he was not referred back to psychiatry for 4 months. A psychiatric nurse practitioner then continued EE on the same medication despite his reported symptoms. Incompetence. This is not a good service here. So we're looking at first you had the psychiatrist, now we got the nurse practitioner. EE was found dead in a cell a few weeks later, hanging from a noose. First responders noticed that his body was cold to the touch and had signs of rigor mortis stiffening. They estimated he had been dead for hours. He was found during morning head count, and a review of security footage shows that the security staff did not complete rounds in his housing unit overnight. So, so again, what we're looking at is a pattern. No one did their job, right? So you're looking at the first guy. We have the psychiatrist, the nurse here. Now we have the officer who was supposed to do the checks, didn't even do his checks. What would have happened if the officer would have did his check? What would have happened if the nurse practitioner here would have followed up on the symptoms that the guy was presenting with? What would have happened if the psychiatrist would have made a change in the treatment plan? What would have happened? Okay, what would have happened? Okay, so when we and I'm going to come on. I think I'm on camera. So again, what would have happened if people would have done their jobs? Maybe two people would have been still alive. And as we read on this report, 75% of individuals who went into jail with a serious and persistent mental illness and a mental illness didn't survive. So again, this is a DOJ report, Fulton County, Georgia. We're going to talk more about this, but I wanted to share it and just to highlight the importance of getting your help if you are a person living with serious and persistent mental illness, of getting help. If you know someone, if you're a loved one, it's important that we get our brothers and sisters. These are our brothers and sisters. These are people just like us. It's important to get help. Jail should not be the first be the first caretakers for individuals living with serious and persistent mental illnesses. I get the report. The guards don't have time. They're overworked. I get it. But then this report here, we had people, mental health professionals, who were contracted with the jail. We can't blame the guards for these two suicides. These two people dying by suicide. This was the mental health professionals who didn't do what they were supposed to do. So it's important that we all have to do a better job. We all have to advocate for support. We have to, be involved. If you have a loved one with a serious and persistent mental illness, go with them to treatment. Make sure that you connect with the treatment providers, that you have your name on the list. So if something happens, you can call. Know who to call in the crisis, right? The crisis team. The police shouldn't be the first response to a psychiatric emergency because remember, serious and persistent mental illnesses are treatable. So again, this has been It's Getting Better All the Time, Mental Health Outreach with your host, Sister A. Legree, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. And we will come back more with this DOJ report in Fulton County, Georgia. Department of Justice looking at the jail conditions, which were just terrible. But I wanted to focus on the impact that it has on individuals living with a serious and persistent mental illness or mental illness. Again, log on to our website at igbatt.com. God bless you and have a great day.